your premier source for South Louisiana sports. Welcome into the American Sports Podcast. Now here's your host, BD.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into the 11th episode of the American Sports Podcast. I am your host, BD, and this week I am covering the Saints draft with my special guest on the Plus One segment, Scott Prather of ESPN 1420. I also cover the new contracts for Taysom Hill and Jameis Winston and give you my takes on both of those. All of that right after a word from our sponsor.
The American Sports Podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors. Sola Safety. Sola Safety becomes part of your management staff and helps you complete the tasks necessary to have a robust safety management system so that you can focus on production. Now more than ever, executives, business owners, and organizational leaders are trying to stretch their dollars, maximize their people power, and create long-term sustainable results for their companies. Program development and implementation is our business. Let us help you implement a safety management system which will enable your organization to maintain compliance. Contact Sola Safety at 337-210-3352. 337-210-3352. Plus One.
My guest this week on Plus One is the host of the Great S.C.O.T.T show every weekday from 7 to 9 a.m. and is also the brand manager and the program director for sports radio ESPN 1420 right here in the Acadiana market. Scott Prather is on the line. Scott, it's an honor to have you on my show.
Man, Britton, thanks, dude. This is awesome. How are you, dude? How you doing with all the quarantine stuff?
I tell you what, man, it's been okay. I've been one of the lucky ones to still be working, and I'm grateful for that. I know some people who haven't. I'm dying. I hate to use the word dying, but I'm suffering without any sports and everything. I was worried there for a bit coming up with content to fill the podcast with, but I tell you what, I haven't had any trouble. So I'm grateful for that as well. And I wanted to get you on the line today because we just had the draft this past weekend, and I listened to your show often, even when you were in the afternoons. And I like your take on the NFL. I like your take on the Saints. So after this past weekend's draft, I wanted to kind of get your opinion in regards to the Saints. And my thought process was that in the past, the Saints have kind of treated the draft differently than any other team. Not worse, but just kind of differently, right? They're fine trading future picks to move up to go and get the guy that they want. You saw them do it for Alvin Kamara a few years ago. You saw them dealing a second-round pick to go up and get. You saw them deal a first-round pick to go up and get Marcus Davenport. They entered this draft with only 5 picks, tied for the fewest in the league, because of some of those trades. So how do you think they fared with only 4 total picks this weekend?
Well, Britton, I think I'll say it every year. I think to grade a draft right after, I always think is kind of dumb. Unless you're talking about the Packers this year, let's go ahead and give them an F. But typically, we don't know. Look, we should grade drafts a few years after the fact. Sometimes your draft is so good, you can grade it after 1 year. Like in 2017, when you had every player make the team, and I think that year they had 7 total picks: Lattimore, Ramczyk, Williams, Kamara, Anzalone, Hendrickson, and Muhammad, who ended up eventually being released, but was on a Colts roster that very same season. So all those guys were in the NFL. That was such a knockout of a draft right out the gate that after year 1, you could say A. But typically it takes a little while to go back and say, okay, how would you grade this draft now? We're going to be saying this, and if we're saying A after 1 year with the Saints, then all 4 of these guys are going to contribute right away. I don't think Stevens is going to make the team. He's more of a project, probably a practice squad guy. But these other 3 guys, in Ruiz, Bond, and Troutman, they're going to play in 2020, assuming we have a season guy willing. And they're guys that they felt like, look, we had a number of draft picks in 2018, and they're not on the team right now.
Right.
Rick Leonard was a miss, okay? But Jamerson and Cameron Moore, they were on rosters that same season. They just weren't good enough to make the Saints roster out of camp because the roster was a little deeper than it was the year prior in 2017. And part of the reason was how good the 2017 draft was. Boston's got another one. They had him on the roster, then in the practice squad. They tried to shuffle enough to where they could keep him, and eventually the Eagles just snatched him away. Last year, Caden Ellis was on the team, but IR. Alize Mack got cut, but signed with another team's practice squad. Hampton made the team. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is a guy we saw play a lot last year, as a fourth rounder, and of course Eric McCoy. So what they've done the last few years is maybe cut back on the number of guys they picked, but they're looking for guys that, okay, we think this guy can make an impact right now. Let's go ahead. Let's give up some assets. Let's move up. Let's just take them. The Saints have always been a BPA, franchise when it comes to the draft. They're not going to take a guy at a need just because it's a need. Best case scenario, it's the best player available for them, high on their big board, and it fills the position of need. And I think, I think that's debatable year to year in terms of who that might be. But I can't really grade the draft. I think there was a lot of criticism for them giving up a ton of assets to move up and take Troutman. I think that's silly. I mean, I think you criticize them in a year where maybe they need a lot of players. If they had done that in 2015 or 2016, when they really needed a lot of players and the roster needed a lot of help, I would have said, okay, that was a dumb move. How much is this guy going to do? But the roster right now, I mean, they're stacked. I mean, they won 37 regular season games the last 3 years. They have one of the most talented rosters on the NFL. So if you were to acquire 15 draft picks like Minnesota did this year, you're going to be looking at a whole lot of cuts. And you still have 1 year roster-wise under the previous CBA. So you don't have that expanded practice squad and extra roster spots that you're going to have in 2021. And I think that's probably part of the thinking as well, right? There's only so many places you can store these guys, and if they're really good, well, they're just going to be someone playing somewhere else. So I think next year it's going to be different. I think you're going to see the Saints take more than 4 players in the draft. I think the new CBA will have something to do with it. I think a lot of the next contracts they have coming up, Britain, right? I mean, you're going to have to pay a lot of money to keep some of these great players. We mentioned the 2017 draft. I mean, they're going to pay Ramczyk a lot of money. Marcus Williams is going to be due for a contract. We'll see what happens next with Kamara. Lattimore, obviously, is due for a contract. So when you start having to pay these guys, maybe they let Sheldon Rankins walk, right? He's in the last year of his deal. I don't know. Maybe he has a bounce-back season after coming off of that injury and being not 100% last year. I know I'm rambling, but I think they looked at a number of things when they did it. Their current roster, the current CBA, the roster size of practice squad additions changing in 2021, and a lot of these contracts coming up. So you can't afford to go 4 players or 3 players if Stevens doesn't make the team, and I don't think he will, every year. But I think you have to look at specifically a team's roster, what their salary cap's like, who's in line for the next contract. And I think when you look and analyze every single one of those things, then the draft for the Saints makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I don't think there's one thing that you said that I don't agree with. I think that you see teams that are either in rebuilding phases or they're competing for championships. And to me, obviously the Saints are not in a rebuilding phase, but I think that they're always, and most teams are, they're always planning for the future, right? So the future right now in everybody's minds is the future after Drew Brees, as he's the center point and what the team's built around. And you've got Taysom Hill on the team. You've got now Jameis Winston on the team. You're trying to think about, well, what's our future at the quarterback position? And I think that some of the holes and weaknesses on the team last year that led to some losses, including the loss to Minnesota in the playoffs, a game that I was at, and was a heartbreaker. I think you filled those gaps, you filled those holes in this draft, even though you only got 4 players out of it. And that maybe doesn't count Stevens, but it could, because if you have Taysom Hill as your starting quarterback, then he's not that versatile Swiss Army knife player anymore, and Stevens sort of fits that role. So I agree. I don't think he's going to make the team. I too think he's going to be a practice squad guy or something to that effect. And I think you can groom him to fall into that, because that's the type of player that he was in college. I think that the only pick that I was sort of surprised by, and then went back and looked at it some more and watched some of his film and read some of the literature on him, was the Bowen pick, right? So Zach Bowen, the outside linebacker from Wisconsin, it's an interesting fit in Dennis Allen's defense because he's basically a defensive end in college, playing as an outside linebacker in a 3-4.
Right.
And that's not what the Saints run, but I think he has the versatility. That's what you read, that's what you see. Everyone says, "Oh, he's versatile." So I think he could fit in, but I think maybe you talked about the BPA, right? Taking the best player available. That's what the Saints have always done. I think he fell so far down, and they had a high grade on him that they basically couldn't pass on him.
Yeah, and I think they did the same thing with Troutman, right? They had him top 40 on their big board. They're sitting there in the 70s. And, I mean, is he going to be an edge rusher? Is he going to be a linebacker? I don't know. But Deuce Wyndham, a friend of mine who does some great stuff for The Athletic and hosts the Who Dat Confessional podcast and does a lot of, he went to an academy where he studied, football scouting. So
Right.
He looks at a lot of the film. And he made a good point on my show this morning in that, the Saints defensively and a lot of defenses today with the pass-happy league. I mean, there might be a few opponents where you're playing a lot of 4-3 or your base D, but for a lot of opponents, you're just playing a ton of nickel and dime today, and that's why I think the safety market, wasn't too hot 2 years ago, and suddenly last year they're all getting paid a ton of money. I think teams are looking more for those tweeners because with a lot of nickel packages, you're only having two linebackers on the field at once. I mean, I think Saints fans can all agree if something happens to Demario Davis, they're screwed. I mean, there's no other way about it. I mean,
Right.
They're going to be in a lot of trouble defensively. Anzalone's great. I mean, he's one of the best athletes on the team, but the guy, dating all the way back to his high school days, has had like one season where he didn't get hurt. One, and it was 2018. Alonso's had some significant injuries. Robertson is a guy that you can plug and play. I think he's maybe valued a little more by the fan base than his play on the field, special teams captain. So how much is Bond going to play linebacker when you only have two on the field at once? I think on some third downs, maybe if it's 3rd and 5, 3rd and 4, you want to rush the passer. You need somebody in that second line of defense. I think Kenneth Murray would have been a great pick for the Saints had he still been there at 24 because you could have played him next to Davis and built a future there. Anzalone, while he's a great player, you could say about any player, Britton, well, if they're healthy, sure. I mean, but people only begin that phrase, if he's healthy, for guys that get hurt a lot.
Yeah.
Like no one says, well, if he's healthy, Drew Brees is going to do this year. No one ever says that. You know what I'm saying? You might say, well, if he gets hurt when you're talking about Taysom or Jameis Winston or whatever, but that's a different discussion. When you begin a phrase with, well, if he's healthy, you only say that about guys that have a history of it. I mean, we say it about Teron Armstead, great player, right? Elite talent. If he's healthy, he's this, but he gets hurt a lot. Anzalone, I mean, he gets hurt more than that, just dating back to his high school days. So, okay, so now you got Alonso. All right, well, he's had some times where he's finished seasons on IR. So can Bond turn into a linebacker that's going to play a lot in a nickel package, next to Davis? Can he, how is he in pass coverage? I don't know. Can he be that Craig Robertson in terms of being that third guy to play next to Davis, depending on what happens to the other two? And they're not playing nickel, every single snap or anything like that, but it is the majority of the snaps. So you need a solid number 2 next to Davis. I don't know if Bond's going to be that. I think you're going to see him used in some blitz packages a good bit. I mean, you pointed out his ability to rush the passer and some of the things he did in college. So they like the guy. They had a high grade on him. He was high on a lot of these big boards, and he's going to get a chance to play. They're going to put him in 51. I don't think he's going to be a Jonathan Vilma type impact player for the Saints, but Saints don't have a great history of drafting linebackers. Anzalone, I think, would be one of the few good ones if he was healthy, that you would say, okay, well, they got a solid pick there. What was he, a 3rd rounder?
Yeah.
It just, they don't, I mean, you really got to go back to Mark Fields 25 years ago. It's the last time the Saints drafted a really solid linebacker. It has been a long time, and I mean, at this point, we don't even know if that's what Bond's going to play. Though I suspect, if I was a bet man, I'd say that's probably it. But who knows, man? Maybe he just comes in and plays DN in pass rushing situations. I don't know.
Yeah, you talk about Murray in the first round. I know a lot of Saints fans wanted Queen, and I think mostly that just because he's an LSU player. And a lot of fans were upset with the Ruiz pick because it's not a sexy pick. I love that pick. I think this year's sexy pick in my eyes, obviously, is the tight end Trotman. I think that could turn out to be, besides Ruiz, obviously in the interior line, I think that could turn out to be the best pick in regards to skill position, skill assets in this draft. And just because of how Sean Payton uses that type of player in his offense, we saw it with Jimmy Graham, and I think Trotman's a little bit better suited for that kind of role, the Jimmy Graham role in this offense, because he's a little bit thicker, he's a little bit bigger, right? So he's a better blocker too. So he's basically just like a huge receiver that you can plug in at tight end and have him block for you as well. So to me, that was my favorite pick in this whole draft. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I like thinking. Look, you got to think long term stability at the tight end position. Everything I've read is he's a great route runner. You know, adequate blocker. We'll see what happens going from FCS to NFL. But you know, the guy, you know, he got nasty when it came time to run block Dayton. You know, the Pioneer Conference is different than the NFC South.
Of course.
But, you know, we've seen guys at lower level colleges at tight end, like a Dallas Goedert, come in and make an impact. But for Goedert, you know, he gets to play next to Ertz. And I think for Troutman and for the Saints, having this kid come in and just go in and play right away a lot, not the best move, right? And luckily for the Saints, he doesn't need to. You got Jared Cook, you got Josh Hill, and now you got somebody that's not a Dan Arnold or a Garrett Griffin, or you've got a guy that, one, can make plays with his route running, and, you know, and two, just long-term, eventually be the guy. I think Jared Cook's in for another big season statistically. I thought the second half of last season, once he really got comfortable in the offense and once Breeze was back, you started seeing him. I thought he played terrific. You know, he took a lot of flack from fans the first half of the season. I thought the latter part, Jared Cook, was really, really good, and I think he's going to have another good year. But you know, he's in his 30s now, and you got to think, okay, who's going to be the next in this offense? And Troutman, I think, is eventually going to fill that role. I think you're going to see him in spots in 2020. He'll have a couple touchdowns. He'll have a couple plays where it's like, man, I like this kid. He'll be more involved later in the season than he will early in the season. But I think 2-3 years from now, he's the starting tight end for the Saints, and he's catching a lot of balls. He's in on running plays. He's run blocking. You know, the guy in man coverage, yeah, he's not fast, right? I think he ran a 4.8 40, but his route running is so pristine that in a Saints offense, really, if you can do that well, especially with Breeze at quarterback, I mean, who knows who'll be the quarterback 3 years from now? But I think he can just, you know, put him in the slot against the cover 3 defense. I mean, run a deep out corner route. He can do a lot of those things based on what I've read. And look, I'm not a film guru. I mean, I watch highlights that are on a couple of blogs, but based on everything I've read and based on people I've talked to that really study the film and do it for a living, that's what they've told me about it. So I was like, wait, you're trading how many picks for him? But again, once you go after the fact and you're not in the moment and you look at roster, cap, who's in line for what we were talking about 10 minutes ago, right? Who's in line for a contract next, what the new CBA is going to look like beginning in 2021. Once you throw all that together, the pick makes a lot more sense.
I agree. One last thing for you, I got for you, Scott. I want your way too early prediction. Give me your 1 through 4. How the NFC South finishes next season.
Well, I think the Saints are the favorite again. I really believe that they've got the best roster in the NFC South. They're built to compete for a Super Bowl. I mean, they've won it the last 3 years, and Tampa, I 9-7, like that's what I'm feeling. I get you have Brady, but you saw Tampa invest a lot in their O-line, and that's because their O-line's not really good.
They were terrible last year.
I mean, Jameis was constantly under duress, and so when you have a turnover-prone quarterback already not being comfortable in the pocket, and now you've got a guy that, is 43 and is less mobile than I am. He can throw the ball great. You give him some time, he can make some things happen even at his age. But Mike Brady was playing at an elite level last year. So I think it's more sizzle than steak with Tampa. I think they're a 9-win team. And Carolina, they can say what they want. They're rebuilding. And so that leaves, the team that blew a 24-point lead in the Super Bowl. And while I want to sit here and bash them, they just got off to such a rough start last year with so many injuries. I'm going to say Saints. I think Tampa's a 9-win team. I think Atlanta's a 9-win team. And I think Carolina's got a losing record next year. I don't know exactly what it's going to be, but they're not going to be 500 or above 500. I think they're building it the right way. I think they're rebooting that thing, but it's going to be 2 or 3 years before they're back in the mix in terms of competing for the division. So I think the Saints win it. I think you have Tampa and Atlanta right there, 2 and 3, both with 9 wins. I think Carolina's somewhere around the 6-win mark.
I agree. Without getting into actual predictions or records or anything, I have the Saints still as the early favorite. I think Atlanta. I think you're right. I think Atlanta still has a strong roster. I think they got better with this draft just in regards to the quality of their picks and filling needs. And I think Tampa's probably in third and Carolina's in fourth. So, Scott, it's been a pleasure having you on, man. I hope we can do this again sometime in the future. Maybe when we get back to some Raging Cajun sports, get into some baseball and some softball, and then, of course, an exciting football season for the Cajuns coming up. Catch Scott in the mornings on ESPN 1420 and .com from 7 to 9 a.m. Scott, thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure, Britton. Have a good one, my friend.
All right, you too, bud.
The New Orleans Saints.
All right, let's talk about Jameis Winston. So, before we get into this, let me prelude this by saying I have been one of the biggest criticizers of Jameis Winston. Mainly last year. I mean, the guy threw 30 interceptions and was responsible for 42 turnovers in total. And that is one of the main reasons, among other, that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were not successful. So I've been heavily critical of him in the past, and I will continue to be if he continues to play the way that he has, and have the personality and ego that he has. But that being said, he is now a Saint. And the one thing that I keep coming back to all season long last year, when you talk to Taysom Hill, when you talk to Teddy Bridgewater about playing quarterback with the Saints, okay? Like, let me just say this. I remember in Seattle, after Drew Brees went down, and we knew we weren't going to have him for a while, and you would listen to what those guys would say over and over, both guys, is how much they learned about playing quarterback by watching Drew Brees. How much they learned about being a quarterback under Sean Payton, under Pete Carmichael, under Joe Lombardi. All right? They did it by watching Brees' work ethic, his attention to detail, how he came into a room, how he planned his week, and how he executed that week, and the success that came along with that. And maybe, just maybe, that is exactly what Jameis Winston needs to turn his career around. He's always been the guy, right? He's always been the number one. He was a first-round draft pick, the guy in Tampa Bay. Again, heavily criticized because of the overly lack of success and his ego to go along with it. But he's always been the guy. So maybe now watching the guy, Drew Brees, a future Hall of Famer, maybe watching him work is exactly what Jameis Winston needs. An exercise in studying skills. On the other side of that, the Saints literally have nothing to lose with this. Especially now that we know the figures and the financial side of his contract, which we'll talk about in a second. But the Saints have nothing to lose. This is it's a no-brainer. Um, Winston also spent some of his time in Tampa Bay with constant changes in coaching and playbooks and schemes, etc. The Saints obviously are way more stable at this point. So it's a no-brainer for Winston. It's a no-brainer for the Saints. Just like the Hill deal. I think that Jameis Winston is still a very talented quarterback. And he's probably the most talented backup quarterback in the league. If you think that you could lose Drew Brees for 2 or 3 games, or 4 games, or 5 games, like in the 2019 season, if you think you could lose him in the 2020 season to an injury, what backup quarterback gives you the best chance to win games? I don't think there's a backup quarterback in the NFL more talented than Jameis Winston. I'm not comparing him to starting quarterbacks. Don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand what I'm saying. He's not a starting quarterback anymore. He is now a backup quarterback for the New Orleans Saints. Comparing him to backups, and Jameis Winston is a guy I take first of all the NFL backups. So I went through all of them, and I'm not going to name them all off. And there are some that you could compare him to that you would say, well, maybe that guy, like RG3 in Baltimore. Maybe Case Keenum in Cleveland. Who knows what's going to happen with Nick Foles and Mitchell Trubisky in Chicago. Chase Daniel is now in Detroit. All right, and that's who I wanted initially to come in and fill that role, but Detroit scooped him up. Mariota in Las Vegas. All right, but that guy was just unseated by Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. Jameis was unseated by Tom Brady. Okay, and I wouldn't have minded Chase Daniel coming back to New Orleans, like I just said, or going after someone like Andy Dalton had he been available. But Jameis is not the worst you could have done at this position and have that security in the event that Brees goes down. Who knows how well he does with the Saints in 2020? Who knows if he ever even sees the field? Okay, who knows what the future holds for him? But I think it's a good thing. And then you get into the contract details, right? So the actual contract details actually come out, and we see why it's very good for the Saints. It's very good for Jameis Winston, too. He has signed a 1-year, $1.1 million deal. The guy's going to make $1 million to sit behind Drew Brees and Taysom Hill and learn from the expertise of Drew Brees, Sean Payton, the assistant coaches, all that. They're paying him $1 million to do it. Okay? That's a shocking discount for a former first overall pick who started 5 years in the NFL. Think about that for a second. Okay? So, how does that salary compare to some of his peers? Other backup quarterbacks, similar to what we just talked about. 60 different quarterbacks are expected to make a higher annual salary this year than Jameis Winston. All right. That includes both of Winston's backups in Tampa Bay last year. Ryan Griffin, who used to be a Saint, making $1.4 million, and Blaine Gabbert making $1.1 million. 1.187 actually, a little bit more than Jameis. So sure, Winston can surpass both of them thanks to a $3.4 million incentive base written into his contract for both playing time, performance, those types of things. But that would require extensive downtime for Drew Brees and Taysom Hill, in my opinion, and it's not likely to happen. So he's not likely to pass those milestones unless a series of dominoes fall in place. Okay, so you're looking at a $1.1 million deal for Winston to come in and learn, sit, be a security blanket. Winston's deal with the Saints looks even stronger of a bargain when you look at other bigger backup salaries around the league, right? Marcus Mariota, drafted just behind him actually in 2015, is earning $8 million per year from the Raiders as a backup. The Bears traded for the right to pay Nick Foles $8 million as their backup in the event that he doesn't unseat Mitchell Trubisky. Former Saints high five orders with Drew Brees, Chase Daniel, making $4.3 million from Detroit this year. You can see his intention of approaching it as a learning opportunity and hoping to revive his career from the interviews that he's doing, right? And I have a clip here from his one interview. Listen to him talk.
I think I'm going to being a part of New Orleans Saints, being a part with Drew Brees, Taysom Hill, Sean Payton, Coach Joe Lombardi, Coach Pete Carmichael Jr. When you think about that room, I mean that's like a Harvard education in quarterback school. So I wanted to put my ego aside, put the money to aside, and think about my family, think about my career, and it was no better position than to be in the same room with someone that I really looked up to, someone that I admired since I've been playing this game, and Drew Brees. And just understanding where I'm at in my career, I've done some great things with the Bucs. I'm going to miss being a strong quarterback, but you never know what happens. I think that this is just a great and unique step to join Drew Brees.
This is the same guy who a couple of months ago was telling reporters in Tampa Bay that he balled out. And look at the tape. After throwing 30 interceptions. Yeah, he threw for 4,200 yards and 30 touchdowns, but he also accounted for 30 interceptions and 42 turnovers in total. Same guy saying he was balling out and deserved the big contract. Now he's come back down to earth a little bit. And he's saying, I'm going to take $1 million a year to go sit in a room with Drew Brees, Taysom Hill, Sean Payton, Joe Lombardi, Pete Carmichael, and learn. Put my ego aside. There was word that he got a more lucrative deal or a more lucrative offer from other teams, one of which being the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he chose the Saints, hoping to revive his career in the same way that Teddy Bridgewater did last year, who is now making $21 million per year from the Carolina Panthers. So it's a bold strategy. We'll see if it pays off for Winston. Bridgewater's market didn't really rise much after his first year with the Saints because he didn't get much playing time. But with other teams only taking an interest in Bridgewater after he started and won 5 games in a row, there's no reason that Jameis can't come in here, learn from Drew Brees, possibly stay with the Saints beyond 2020, or go with another team and use the knowledge and the downtime to go and play well in 2021 and possibly play well enough to garner a bigger contract. If Winston really wants to turn things around, he may have to wait a little longer than expected, but I think he chose this situation and this team, this situation for that very reason. And it was the right selection. It was the right choice. So, good deal for the Saints. Good deal for Jameis Winston. In my eyes, I hope he never sees the field. Not because of him, but because of I don't want Drew Brees to go down. I don't want Drew Brees to be hurt. Right? I don't want Drew Brees to be hurt. So Taysom Hill received a new contract from the New Orleans Saints, and this deal is interesting to me. I heard he was not planning on signing his tender anytime soon when it was placed on him, and that to me only meant one thing. He was seeking an extension, and if you follow me on Twitter, you will remember that I tweeted it at the time. I expected it to be some type of 2 to 3 year deal, which was correct. But here's why it's interesting to me. And when I say interesting, I think that Taysom Hill could have a major impact on how the league is like molded for the future when it comes to contracts. So basically, they traded a 1-year, $4.6 million restricted free agency tender for a 2-year, $21 million contract with the Saints. After analyzing the terms of the deal and the future for the Saints, I think it's a no-brainer win-win that rewards Taysom Hill with $60 million in guaranteed money, and that also allows the Saints to keep Hill through the 2021 season without having to worry about potentially having to use the franchise tag next offseason on him to keep him around. That franchise tag can now possibly be used for someone else that has a contract coming up. You have safety Marcus Williams that's going to need to be paid, cornerback Marshawn Lattimore that's going to need to be paid, running back Alvin Kamara that's going to need to be paid. So that could possibly be used on someone else. The full details of Taysom's deal are He received an $8 million signing bonus. His base salary for 2020 is $841,000, so it's friendly to the Saints cap this season. His 2021 roster bonus is $1.4 million. That will be due on the 5th day of the league year and is fully guaranteed 5 days after the signing, which we're already past. So his 2021 base salary will be $10.7 million, with $5.7 million guaranteed at the signing this year. So the deal also includes incentives in 2021 of up to $1 million, but with $1.6 million in performance triggers. The incentives vary from like passing yardage, $150,000 for different passing yardage. A passer rating of 90 or more, he gets another $150,000. 65% completion percentage, he gets another $150,000. If he gets Offensive Player of the Year or MVP, he gets $250,000. If he plays 70% of the time and they get 11 wins, he gets $150,000. If he plays 70% of the time and they receive a bye in the playoffs, he gets $150,000. So it goes on and on. There's a bunch of incentives in there for him to make. But it essentially works out to $16 million fully guaranteed over 2 years and $16.3 million increase over the money Hill was already due to make in 2020. So then I started looking at it, and I'm like, well, why did he take the deal? Why was he looking for an extension? Instead of playing on a $4.6 million deal this year and rolling the dice on the possibility of being franchise tagged next year, or playing so well this year that he gets even more money next year from the Saints or some other team, why would he take this deal besides the security of having the money? And there are basically two important points to consider. First, although he's listed as a quarterback, okay, the franchise tag he would possibly receive next offseason is driven by the total number of snaps he takes the prior year. So this coming year, if he's used more as a running back or a tight end or a receiver than he is as a quarterback, his quarterback tender or his franchise tag tender next year would be dependent on how many snaps. If he takes the most snaps at quarterback, the tender is $26.8 million. That's what he would make next year had he not signed this and been tendered franchise tagged. Okay? The tag for a tight end is $10.6 million. And the tag for a running back is $10.2 million. So this is a similar situation that tarnished the relationship between Saints and tight end Jimmy Graham before he was traded to Seattle. Graham wanted to be paid as a wide receiver, but the Saints offered him tight end money because he was a tight end and lined up as a tight end. And it ultimately led to their breakup. I mean, even in the business world, a company is hiring, they have job descriptions to give to applicants of an outline of what their responsibilities would be. The job description for Taysom would be like 20 pages long. So, my second point, the non-exclusive franchise tag is driven by the salary cap. All right. If the cap dramatically declines in 2021 based on like a reduced revenue from this pandemic, then the franchise tenders will drop dramatically. All right. So what if all this coronavirus nonsense continues and the games are played without fans and the revenue is much lower? Now Taysom Hill is immune to that. He knows exactly what he's going to be making next season. He's getting $16 million guaranteed. All right. Rather than playing on $4 million deal this year and having the possibility of being franchise tagged next offseason, and dependent on how many snaps he takes at each position, the position where he takes the most snaps would determine his salary. And most likely, what we're looking at, being that Drew Brees is still on the team, and now you have Jameis Winston, he's not going to take the most snaps at quarterback. This coming season, anyway. So, I think that it's a win-win. Like I said, win-win for Taysom Hill, win-win for the Saints. All right? It's interesting, like I said to me, because I think this is the way that the league is moving. It's moving to a more fluent and diverse base of dictating where players play. And I mean position-wise. It's like a high school kid going into college that is listed as an athlete, right? The coaches are going to put him and use him where he is most effective. That's how Taysom Hill has been used up until now. You just saw the Saints draft another quarterback in the 7th round of this year's draft to attempt to groom him into that same role that you've seen Taysom Hill in. So we're going to see if it continues to happen. We're going to see it's going to shape the way that contracts are done and the way the league identifies positions and players in those positions in the future. So I think it's a good deal. I had a feeling it was coming. That's why I tweeted it. I did get a little bit of flack on Twitter for it. But it was more of I mean, what else? What other options? Why would he not sign the tender? And this is why. He was expecting an extension of some sort because his agent also looked into and saw all the things that I just described. A possibility of lowered revenue, a possibility of playing more snaps at another position besides quarterback and being franchise tag next season, and a little bit of security going into this season and having it for next. So, win-win for Taysom Hill. Congratulations. That brings us to the end of this week's episode of the American Sports Podcast. Join me next week. I'm going to break down all of the undrafted free agents that the Saints brought in. I'm also going to break down some of the rumors in regards to the return of the NBA, the return of Major League Baseball, and how that may look. We've already discussed that to an extent, but now we're hearing some rumblings of how that's going to play out. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll jump into some actual way too early predictions for the NFL and who I think are the top 10 teams to look for to have success in the 2020 season. So join me next week. I have another guest lined up as of now for the +1 segment, and it should be a good one. Stay safe out there, everyone, and thank you for joining me today.